Welcome to the second installment of my forge build. If you haven't seen the first video yet, I'll put a link in the description. In that video, the focus is mostly around the build of the cart that the forge will be sitting on. The focus of this video will be based around mostly the building of the forge housing itself and the burner. So in the first video I said I built the cart, but also if you've seen that video, you'll know that I prepped all the pieces used to build the cart and the prepping of all the pieces, all the plate steel used to build the forge that I'll be using in this video. And so if you've seen that, you know that I cut everything with a cutting wheel on a 5-inch angle grinder. So I didn't really have, precise equipment. So when you see the squares on the pieces of plate in this video, if you're wondering what that is, I actually, when I got done cutting, I went through and checked squareness on all my corners, and corners that were the most square, I drew a square on, with the idea that when I started piecing things together, if I started with these squared corners as my starting joints, it would make everything come together better whenever I started piecing all those things together as I went along. I don't know if it helped or not, but it definitely didn't hurt. Everything comes together pretty well, so I don't know if the theory helped that or not. But that explains what my thought process was when you see the squares on the various pieces throughout this project. I just want to take a minute and make sure everybody knows I am not a welder. This is the first project. This is my first fabrication project I've done. My welding table is a couple of sawhorses with a pallet on top and my leftover plate steel to work off of. I have very minimum tools, mostly just some magnets and a few clamps here and there, you'll see. But yeah, my tools are pretty limited. So you're going to see me checking squareness a lot as this project goes along. Something I was real nervous about. I'm constantly, every time I'm tacking together pieces, I'm going through and checking how square all the corners are, all the sides are, before I actually weld in all the seams later on. Also, with that said, if you are a welder or have any welding experience or just like making fun of people on the internet, please feel free to drop a comment and roast my welding skills. It won't bother me. In fact, I'll respond to every one of them. So this should be fun. So I'm going to take a second to make fun of something that I noticed whenever I was watching videos on welding and whatnot. I love YouTube. I use YouTube for anything. I'm a man who my interests come and go with the wind. Some of them last a little bit longer. But every time I have a new interest, YouTube is my go-to to learn as much about that as I can. So with having a project coming up where I was going to be welding and not knowing anything about welding, I watched some welding videos. I watched different forge making videos where people were welding, and just something that caught my eye that I thought was funny was a few people feel the need to censor out the light from the welding. And so that made me laugh when I saw that. Anytime somebody felt like that was necessary. You can stare at the welding through your television. It's not going to hurt your eyes. Your TV is not capable of putting out the UV and IR wavelengths that the welding is putting out in real life. And here I learned to pay attention where I put my tools when I'm welding. As you can see that the handle of my welding pliers multi-tool there is on the other side of the seam I'm welding, right up against it. Here I stopped to admire my welding beads. So if you did want to drop a comment, roasting my welding skills, the 4-minute mark would be an excellent time to timestamp it if you wanted to do the most damage to my self-confidence. At this point, I'm done fabricating the pan, at least putting all the sides and everything together and forming it, and I've moved on to the hood part of the forge. So in making this video, when I was doing the editing of the video, I was really afraid that I was showing too much. I was showing too much of the welding and everything. It wasn't going to be interesting. People weren't going to be interested in watching that. It was going to get boring. What I've spared you of is the setup of every section. That was the tedious part, getting everything put together and set up and making sure all the corners were as square as I could get. Pieces were parallel, pieces were perfectly vertical, perfectly square to the base, to the welding table. and going around and checking that all multiple times, having to make minor adjustments, which throws something else out. And so that took the brunt of my time. That really took a lot longer than any of the welding or anything. And I took all that out because it just wasn't interesting. You can see how I have them set up when I start going. But yeah, and I'm bringing it up here because I really remember it being something that I was really nervous about with the top of the hood. And it took me a long time to get it to where I felt comfortable to start tacking it together. At this point, I was pretty happy with how all the pieces had fit together. Everything was nice and tight without having to force anything. And it's all tacked together. Here, all the seams have been welded completely shut from the inside and outside, and I've ground everything nice and smooth and made it pretty. Now it's on to building the burner. The forge housing is done for the moment, stepping away from that, and I'm going to start working on the burner. This is a piece of 3-inch square tubing that's about 13 inches long, and I'm starting the process of turning it into a ribbon burner. Now I need to cut a 2 1/8 inch hole into the back of my burner for where the air and gas come in. I've got a cheap Wen drill press for wood, and while it can be turned down pretty slow for woodworking, it's not what you need for metalworking, and it's pretty hard on this hole saw, which you'll see here in a minute. I finally made it through and have the hole drilled out, but it took a long time to get here. I didn't exactly cut that whole hole. I'd say at least half of it I ground through. You gave your life for a good cause, little hole saw. Thanks. But on a positive note, I have a nice round hole. Need some deburring, but nice round hole. Here I'm inserting a plate to help distribute the gas throughout the burner so that it's not just going all straight to the holes in the burner, the orifices that are in line with the hole in the back where it's all coming in. So this will help spread it out throughout the burner so that the whole burner is being used. There was no real scientific method to figuring out what to do here. I just found a piece of thin sheet metal that I had that was stainless, gave it a little bit bend in the middle, made a little circular section in the middle right where the gas and air come in that I didn't drill any holes through. And then from the center, I drilled small diameter holes and made them bigger as I went out towards the edges. And so, yeah, again, the idea is to help move the gas and the air that's coming into the back of the burner throughout the whole length of the burner. Now I'm just tacking it in place. Now I'm welding on a 2-inch black iron coupler onto the back. This will be how I connect it to the plumbing for the forge, the plumbing that is the delivery system for the air and the fuel going into the burner. I might want to go back over that right there. Yeah, just a couple of spots. Yeah, so I tell myself just a couple of spots, and then I believe I went all the way around a whole other time, pretty wide, making sure everything was closed up here. Now I'm welding on a couple of brackets. I'll put one on each side, and these will be used later on to mount the burner to the forge itself. I'm done with the burner for now, and now it's time to start working on attaching the burner to the forge. And so I need to start by cutting a hole into the side of the forge where the burner will slide in. The firebox is an arch shape, and so the burner comes in at the very top of the arch, right along the curved top. And what this will do is when it's burning, it will create a swirling effect inside a vortex, which will help with better heat distribution with the forge, making it, more reliable throughout the entire length of the forge. There won't be as many hot spots and cold spots. It'll be more uniform throughout the forge. I wanted to keep this hole as tight as possible, so I've undercut it intentionally, and I spent a lot of time then taking out the areas to make it easier to slide that inside, slowly removing material instead of cutting a hole that was too big. I would later also weld on a piece of angle iron onto the bottom of the burner, and then just a piece of strip steel on the top, just to help give a little bit more overhang and seal up any gaps that were there in the steel. I want to apologize for my shoddy camera work there. I noticed there's a lot of views of just the back of my head where you can't really see what's going on, just the back of my head. But on a positive note, I am told that is my best side. Now I'm marking off the holes onto the forge body. I'll later drill these through, and I will put stainless steel bolts through from the inside and then weld them in place from the inside. And those will be used for the mounting bracket for the burner. Here you can see what I was talking about earlier. There's a thin strip of bar stock there welded to the top of the burner, and you can't really see it very well, but there's a small section of like 1-inch angle iron on the bottom, and that was just for helping seal up those seams. So I'm tightening down the bolts into place now, putting the nuts on the other side to keep them secured in place, and then I'll flip it over and weld the nut heads in from the inside. still a little tight trying to put it together the first time after getting those welded on. So what I end up doing to get it to fit is I drill out the holes on the bracket on the burner by like another 1/16 of an inch, just to give a little wiggle room and make it a little easier to get it to slide on, which no problem now. The burner's bolted onto the forge. I'm done with that. So I'm moving on to the next step, which is going to be securing the forge to the cart that I built in the first video. So I've got some 2-inch angle iron here that I am welding onto the top of the cart. And these will work as brackets to attach the forge to the cart later on. Just like with the forge burner, I'm marking holes off on the pan of the forge where these will line up with the holes on the brackets you just saw me weld on. And so I'll drill these out, and then I've got stainless steel bolts that I'll put on to the inside and then weld on to the inside of the pan. I got a little lazy in some of my recording. That's the cart of the forge that's on the right side of the screen there that I just moved to let my wife through. And you can see on the bottom shelf, number one, there is a bottom shelf, so I didn't show that, but it's just a piece of sheet metal that's cut out and welded to go into place down there. But sitting on it are the doors, so I didn't show the doors being built. Now, I think they're done here, but they're 4 inches thick, and it just seems very ridiculous to have doors that thick. And so I cut an inch off of the width and brought them down to 3 inches, which is probably still ridiculous, but definitely made them to where they'll be lighter later on and won't stick out as far. The doors match the same shape as the hood of the forge, and they'll be covering the front and back openings of the arched fire chamber. And so what I've done is I've built them to where they're large enough that they overhang that those arched openings by 2 inches all the way around. Got the holes drilled out in the pan, and now I'm getting the stainless steel bolts out and getting those secured and bolted on so that I can go ahead and weld them on from the inside. But before I go ahead and weld it all together, take a moment to check and make sure everything lines up well. So once I get these welded on and everything fits together nicely, that will conclude this video. If you've made it this far, I appreciate you watching. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and if you did, please give that thumbs up a click. Thanks for giving it a watch, and hopefully I'll see you again when I get the third video out.